Hi, everyone. So today we're going to discuss surveying individual historic properties. So for our agenda, we're going to talk about identifying the historic property you want to document, conducting the background research, going on a site visit, and filling out the historic property inventory form. And before we jump into things, I wanted to see how familiar you all are with the historic property inventory form. That's our state level documentation form. And I think Claire is going to put a poll up on the screen.
Yes, that is still loading.
Okay. If that's not working, people can just post in the chat or maybe raise your hand if you have had experience with the HPI form. Cool, seeing quite a few hands. Cody, you don't count. Great, good to hear. So first, we're going to talk about identification, which is determining which properties you want to survey. And this might be the easiest part of the process. You might already have a local property in mind that you want to document. And since you all are here representing certified local governments, it's pretty likely that a lot of the properties in your area have already been documented through previous surveys. And with that in mind, we're first going to start off by talking about the West Virginia SHPO GIS map, which a couple of the presenters have mentioned. It's publicly available on our website and it's free to use. And while we are required by law to maintain inventories of historic properties in the state, we also want to make that information available to researchers so that they can use the information contained in these forms. So our GIS map is one of the main ways we do that. And so on the map, we have different colored pins for different resources. So we have National Register sites that have been demolished, architectural sites that have been demolished, and cemeteries. And the pins marking the demolished properties, the ones in gray, those are fairly new since I've been with the SHPO. And it can be a little bit depressing sometimes to see, but we have lost a lot of historic resources in the state. So having those in a different color can kind of give you a visual of where demolitions may have taken place. We're obviously not out in the field, so some of the pins of properties that have been demolished may not be in gray. We're trying to update them when we can. So when you click on one of the pins, a sidebar will pop up. You can see that here on the right, and it has some basic information about the resource, which in this case, it's an architectural site. So we have some information like the date of construction, the architect, the architectural style, and not all of the resources are going to have this much information in the sidebar, but we are working to improve the data set so that it's a little easier to search and see some of that information on that sidebar. Most of the HPIs on file at the SHPO date from the 1970s to the present, and the GIS map does get updated at the end of every month. So we're constantly adding new HPI forms to the map. And there is one caveat for this. We don't have documents available for all of the buildings in the state, as much as I wish that was physically possible. So just as you can use the GIS map to see what has been documented, you can also use it to see what areas of the state or your local area have not been documented. And the HPIs are going to be linked next to the word report. This is going to be the same if it's a National Register nomination you're looking at. The nomination will be linked next to report. So whatever document is associated with that resource, it'll be linked there. And this one, in this case, has two HPIs. So we can kind of see some changes over time. So on the left, we have one from 1975 or 76. And on the right is the same residence documented in 2018. And so looking at these forms, we can see that the building actually hasn't changed a whole lot. In this case, it looks like they've just had some window replacements. So having multiple forms on file can kind of give you different points in time to look at and compare. And identifying a property to survey doesn't necessarily have to involve the GIS map, although I do recommend checking there to see if we have anything on file. But often you just know about historic properties in your area from looking around as you're traveling throughout your area. These are all pictures I've taken in my travels around the state of historic properties that, looked interesting and maybe I want to do some more research into in the future. So next we're going to talk about researching the history of a property. And since our time is limited today, I'm not going to go too much into the weeds on the research process and the resources available both in person and online in the state of West Virginia. That is a whole other presentation that I've actually done, and I think Claire might be able to drop a link to that in the chat. I think we have that available on YouTube. But I did want to highlight a few of my favorite resources when researching a historic property. And we'll talk about each of these in a minute, but we're going to talk about property records, Sanborn maps, and photographs. And then, of course, the West Virginia SHPO GIS map that I mentioned is an excellent place to start. I always recommend checking there first. So first, we're going to dive into property records. So some useful legal documents as you're getting started with a property research could be deeds, tax records, building permits, and wills. But today we're going to focus mostly on deeds. And I like to start my search with the West Virginia Property Viewer. It's an online platform the state put together. And that is what you see here on the right. I have a screenshot of that page. And we're going to walk through researching the deed for this specific property that I have highlighted. It's a rental in Morgantown that I lived in 2018. So we're going to click on the parcel assessment report link there that I've got highlighted in purple or pink. And that will take us to the assessment data sheet. So that has a lot of information on it, including the owner's mailing address, the physical address of the property, the parcel information, and then the book and page that the deed is recorded on. And so I have that highlighted here with that arrow. That information is what we're going to take a note of moving forward to the next step. So once you have that book and page number, you're going to want to do a search for X county deed search. So in this case, Monongalia County deed search. And not all counties have this information online. You may need to go in person to the courthouse, but I have found a lot of counties in the state have this information accessible via a portal that looks just like this one. I don't know the software behind it, but a lot of them do seem to use the same platform. And you're going to plug in the book and page number from the previous step, which you can see I did there, book 1615, page 12. We plugged that in and we came up with the listing that we found in the previous step. So that will take you, if we open that image, that will take you to the real estate description. So we've got a scan of the deed, we've got the description, and this will include we've got the legal description of the property, and then we have some mentions of other deed books and pages that additional information is on. In this case, we have a copy of the plat from deed book 19, page 389, and there's also the previous sale from 1995 in deed book 1113, page 613. So we're going to keep following that trail, and I would definitely recommend, if you're doing this sort of research, to make a note of the date of the document and the book and page number, because if you're using a system like this one, you cannot hit the back button just to go back to the previous record. You're going to have to type in the numbers all over again. And if you're not keeping track of which deed you're on, it can very easily get confusing and you might have to start all over at the beginning. So try to track your steps if you can. So if we keep following that trail, looking back in time through these deed books, this particular example actually took me all the way back to 1894 and the original description of the lot, which you can see up there at the top. And so property records are really useful to help you put together a chain of ownership and identify who owned the property at separate points in time. So if in later research you find out that maybe there was an addition added in the 50s, you can look back and see, oh, that was when this family owned the property and maybe they did the addition, you know, for whatever reason. So that can kind of put together a whole trail. And the next resource we're going to talk about are the Sanborn maps. These are one of my personal favorite resources just to browse through. They're very visually pleasing and they've got a lot of interesting information in them. And they are intended for fire insurance purposes. So they show a lot of useful information like the building materials, whether that is a wood property or brick or masonry, the number of floors, the type of roof, whether there's a fire alarm or is it nearby to a fire hydrant. So they have a lot of specific information. Here you can see, I think this is just one of the keys that they have for the system. There's a lot of symbols and it can get a little confusing, but they have it laid out pretty well so you can identify what you're looking at on the map. And these are available online through the Library of Congress. They do not have all of the cities in West Virginia, but they do have most of them available. And these are only useful if you're researching a property in a town. They did not survey rural areas. They focused more on the urban areas where there was a concentration of properties, where a fire might be more of a hazard when there's more properties near each other. So I have an example here. This is the Kanawha County Courthouse here in Charleston. And the map on the left is from 1893, and then the one on the right is from 1902. So take a second to compare the two. And what differences do you note? So I've circled everything I saw in this map. There's multiple differences that we can see in that period of 9 years. We have some additions that were constructed. We have some new construction that's happened, and we've also had some demolished buildings around the courthouse there. You can see all of those buildings are no longer there. So the Save More Fire Insurance maps can kind of come together with additional information that you find through your research to see physical changes in the property. And the last resource I'm going to talk about for the research section are photographs. If you can find photographs of the building you're researching, they can be a great resource to show physical changes over time. And there are some online repositories for the state, but many smaller organizations like your local historical society or your local library may not have digitized photos, so you may have to go visit in person. The two big online repositories I want to note are the West Virginia History On View website, which is through the West Virginia Regional History Center at WVU Libraries. Most of the photos in this presentation are from that website. And then the State Archive down here in Charleston also has a small collection of photos digitized. And 99% of the time, you're not going to find a photo with your specific street address. You can't just type in 123 Main Street and find a photo. I wish that was the case. That would be really helpful. But something I found really useful is trying to search using the street name, especially if you're looking in a downtown area, typing in a specific street name, you might be able to, maybe your building is in the background of that picture and you can kind of zoom in and see the details. So you're kind of researching around the property. If the property is a specific business or a church or a bank or something like that, you can often search by those names as well. And so the example I have here is actually Pleasant Street in Morgantown. And this photo is from about 1890, and it shows several brick row houses. And then this photo is from 1920, same view. So the brick row houses we can see have all had storefronts added onto the front of the building. And so in this way, photos can be really useful to pinpoint dates of specific alterations. I didn't look too much into detail to see if I could find more specific information about when the storefronts were added, but this at least gives us a window between those 30 years. That's when these storefronts were added. And you can then use other research to maybe narrow that down further. But photos are also really useful to identify missing architectural features. So maybe the building originally had a front porch and it was since removed. And if you're able to find an original photo, you can look at that and see what the elements were, and then maybe restore the front porch, put that back on the building. So you can kind of use those photos in that way. And before we move on from the research section, here's a more detailed list of some of the types of resources that you should be looking for when you're researching a historic property. No single source is going to be comprehensive. Wish it was that easy again. Sometimes this is tedious. So you're going to need to consult multiple resources to put together a bigger picture of the property you're interested in. So now we're going to get into the fieldwork portion. This part of surveying involves, as you might guess, going out into the field to view the historic resource in person. And while you're on a site visit, we have a lovely picture of Meredith from that same site visit that we went on. You're going to use that time to take photographs of the property and note specific details on the building. And we're going to get into both of those in a second. But before we do, I did want to mention a couple of safety tips when you are surveying. Obviously, do not trespass on private property unless you have arranged permission with the owner previously. You should only be taking photos from the public right-of-way, which is in the sidewalk or in the street safely. Go during the day. Obviously, that's going to be the best time for photos anyway, and take somebody with you. Property owners may have questions if they see you outside their house taking pictures, so be prepared to answer. You're conducting research into the history of the property or of the street or the neighborhood. So when you're looking at a building, on a site visit, what are you actually looking for? And I thought it would be good to utilize an example here. And this is a small office building in Weston. PAWV actually did a 5-day historic masonry workshop here in 2022. I believe I took this photo before that workshop, so does not show any of the work that they might have done at that session. But just take a couple seconds and look at the building and make a mental note of any distinctive features or elements that you might want to include when you're doing the documentation portion. So the things I noted when I was looking at this, we have a pointed Gothic style window. It looks like it's original to the property. We have some irregular colored brick along the right side of the facade. It kind of looks like it might be traces of a porch column, so that's something to note. We have an original 1/1 window on the first floor. There is a wood frame porch. There is a cut stone foundation. There are some joist pockets, likely, again, pointing to a possible front porch. And then there is also some irregular colored brick along the center facade. Again, porch that might be a roof line of a previous porch that was there. And as any good historian would do, I then went back to the 1894 Sanborn map from Weston and found the property. So there indeed was a 1-story wood porch on the building. So again, this shows how we can kind of take the physical evidence of the property that we're seeing in the field, combine it with the research, and we can say, yes, there was a porch there. We have some remains of it. So you can kind of tie those two together. I don't think my title fixed properly. It's supposed to say photographing a resource. So when you're out in the field, you're taking photos, we do have a few do's and don'ts on what we commonly see in the office. So do try to take a 3/4 view of the property, focus in on the main resource, and include at least 2 photos. We don't really have a limit to the amount of photos that you can submit. We are obviously not out in the field, so more photos is better to give a full picture of the building, literally picture of the building. And please don't take photographs from your vehicle. Don't cut off portions of the building. Don't take photographs in poor lighting. This is an example that we got in from one of our consultants, and it's a house, but you can't really tell because you can mostly see the garage, and there's a tree in the way, and there's some glare from the sun, and you can even see the car window side view mirror in the upper right corner. So that is not a good example of a photo. We can't really tell what the resource is or any details about it. And lastly, we're going to talk about documentation. So this will be a little bit more extensive than the other sections. So what do you do with all of the information that you have compiled through your research and through your field work? And as I mentioned, every state is mandated by law to keep survey files of historic properties, but the method of doing that is really left up to the state. So I have a couple different forms here. On the left is the form that Maryland uses. They call it the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties form. It looks a little bit like a National Register nomination if you're familiar with that layout. They may have kind of borrowed some of those elements. And then on the right, we have the Kentucky form. They call it the Kentucky Historic Properties Survey form. And I did check the State Historic Preservation Office websites for all of the states surrounding West Virginia, and Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Virginia all request that their survey data be entered directly into their online system. So as you can see, there's a couple of different ways that the states are doing it, collecting it directly online through a form. And so our office is currently looking at putting our form online, but we do currently accept PDF files and hard copies of HPIs. And when we do have the online version, we will not be taking away the paper ones or the PDF version. It will just be another method for access. So here is the front of our state form. And as you can see, it does look kind of similar to the other forms. We're all collecting approximately the same information. Some of the states vary in terms of the detail that they go into, but we're all kind of looking at the same things. And our form is 2 pages. just a front and a back, and then there's an additional third page called a continuation sheet. And we have that for any overflow information that doesn't fit in any of the boxes, as well as photos. You can put those there as well. And before we dive into the HPI form, I did want to mention the West Virginia National Register and Architecture/History Survey Manual, which is a mouthful. But it basically covers conducting surveys, completing HPIs, and putting together reports. It's primarily used by paid consultants and the consultants working on Section 106 projects. This manual is currently under revision. We're working on streamlining it a little bit and making it a little bit easier for members of the public to use so that it's a little bit more accessible. So once you're ready to do the HPI, we're going to walk through each field on the form, not each field on the form, the fields that people mostly have questions with. A lot of it are self-explanatory, like the street address, the county, pretty straightforward. So I'm trying not to spend too long on this, but if there are any specific fields that you all have questions on, we can always loop back around at the end and discuss those. And as we go through these slides, the way I have it set up is that there are two versions of the same section of the form. So the one on the top is going to be a blank portion of the form, and then the one at the bottom is a good example of an HPI that we recently received. And so for this one, common, historic name, both. This field, we're looking for the common or historic name of the property. So this could be something like the Miller Farmhouse or St. Mary's Church. If there is no known name of the property, you can leave that blank. Field survey number. This field is used by consultants conducting large surveys. They often will have a way of numbering these properties internally before we assign site number. So you all obviously are not doing that, so you can leave that blank. The site number, SHPO only. If you know the HPI site number for the property, you can enter it there. If the property has been previously surveyed, if there's an HPI on our GIS map, it will have that site number there, and you can put it in that field. For negative number, obviously we are not collecting film negatives anymore, so you can leave that blank, and some folks do use that if they're submitting a large number of photos. They'll use that for the photo file name. And for NR listed date, if the site is listed individually or as part of a district, you want to enter the date that the resource was listed in the National Register. Architect/builder. This is where you're going to enter the architect or the builder's name if you were able to determine that through your research. If not, you can leave it blank. The date of construction. If you don't know the exact date, we would appreciate if you put CA to indicate circa. So it is, circa 1890, whatever approximate date you were able to determine through your research. And for style, enter the architectural style. And one of our office's favorite reference books for this is Virginia McAllister's A Field Guide to American Houses. I think we all have our own personal copy in our office. We refer to it a lot. The example I have here, he included the style and then also some key features. We're not looking for the key features. He went a little bit above and beyond with that one. We're just looking for the style itself. And for the three on the bottom, the exterior siding materials, roofing material, and foundation. We're looking for the kinds of materials that make up those elements. So is the siding aluminum? Is there a brick foundation? Maybe the roof is made of tile. Whatever materials you're seeing on the property, you can enter those there. In the next section, UTM number. UTM stands for Universal Transverse Mercator, and that is a coordinate system similar to the latitude and longitude system that you're probably more familiar with. And our GIS map, which I mentioned, does display UTM at the bottom left corner, or you can find websites online to convert a latitude and longitude to UTM coordinates. And a survey organization and date. This is where you want to enter the survey organization, if there is one, and the specific date that the property was surveyed. So if you're documenting the property on behalf of your local landmarks commission, you can use that organization in the field. And the date is important, specific date, including the day, because then we have a fixed point in time. Earlier, we looked at two different HPIs from the 70s and then 2018. Having specific dates will allow us to pinpoint this is what the property looked like at a certain point in time. So that's pretty important. And quadrangle name. This is the U.S. Geological Survey topographical quad map names. And those can be found on our GIS map, and you can also look that up through the USGS website. For part of what survey / FR number, that is used, again, for these larger survey projects, and for those doing federal review projects, you can leave that blank. And we talked about photographs a little bit earlier during the fieldwork section. You can either insert the photo into the section here, like the example I have, or you can put all of the photos in the continuation sheet at the end. I don't have a preference as long as there are photos there. For the map, for properties with multiple outbuildings, such as a farm with a summer kitchen and a barn and an outhouse, we do ask for a sketch map of the resources to show where those outbuildings are in relation to the main property. Other properties, if it's just, maybe one building with a small shed or garage or something, you can use a portion of the USGS map or the map available through the SHPO GIS map. And when you're putting this map together, please include something to identify the subject property. So in this case, we have a red square around the property, as well as the street names, so that we can kind of narrow down where the property is in relation to other things in the area. For present owner information, the West Virginia Property Viewer is another online portal through the state, and that will help us determine the current owner. We looked at that earlier. We had the current owner name and mailing address. You can put that in there. And then for the setting, this is where we want to describe the setting of the resource. Again, we're not able to be out in the field, and while the photos of the resource are going to be useful, they're not going to give us a full picture of the area around the resource. So this is where you want to say, is it located in an urban area or a neighborhood? Are there roads or trees or trails nearby? Maybe there's a waterway that's kind of through the property. So use this space to give us an idea of what is around the resource, what that setting is like. For acres, you can again use the West Virginia Property Viewer to determine the acreage of the property. That will be listed along with all the parcel information. And for archaeological artifacts present, this box is rarely used. If there are archaeological artifacts present, you would just check that box. For the description of building or site, original and present, this is where you want to describe any important features or characteristics not already described on the form. So if original features are known, you want to include that information as well. So some elements that you might put in the section would be a basement, the foundation type, the roof type, window type, maybe the shape of the window openings, specific information about the door surrounds, maybe there are dormers in the roof or chimneys, any specific porch details, really anything that is not included in other sections of the form, you can add that in here. And then for front bays, a bay is a vertical division of a building, and in most cases, you can determine this by counting the number of window or door openings on a building. So if a facade has 5 windows and a door, that would be 6 front bays. And then for alterations, if there have been any visible alterations to the building, you can note them here. And we commonly see things like enclosed porches or replacement windows, vinyl siding, and the like. So that information would go in that field. Additions. If there have been any visible additions to the building, you can note them here. And this would be things like new construction to the side or the rear of the building. We see that commonly. And then for outbuildings, any outbuildings that are on the property would be noted here. So a garage or shed, or the summer kitchen, the smokehouse we mentioned, any of those resources would go here. For the statement of significance, this is where a lot of that historical research is going to come into play. This is where we want to see any known history of the property, including, if you were able to find it, owners' names, specific dates, any significant events that happened at that property. Why is the resource significant to local history? Why is this place important? Is the architecture perhaps distinct or unusual? Or maybe the property is related to a prominent person in the town or the county. And this section really helps our office determine if a property is eligible for listing in the National Register. So we're really getting into a lot of that history. And I know I only have a little bit of a statement of significance here, but when I show the continuation sheet, you'll see that this person, there's a lot more information than what's on this page. And for bibliographical references, this is where we want citations for any resources used in creating that HPI. So you're doing your research, you've got all of these resources that you used. We want to have that information here. And our office does not have a preferred citation style. Personally, I prefer using Chicago. It does not matter which one you pick, but please pick one and be consistent. Don't skip around between citation styles. And a form prepared by. So this is where we want the information of the person that completed the form. I don't necessarily need your personal phone number, but an email address would be helpful. And since you all are most likely completing these for a local landmark commission, you can put that information there as well. Your name and then, X Historic Landmark Commission. I don't need your personal mailing address. So if there's an address for the city where we can reach out to the Landmark Commission, that would be useful. And then the continuation sheet. This is designed to be overflow space for any of the fields on the previous page. If you've got more information that you've located about the property, you can put that here. And this page can also be used for photographs. There's no limit to the number of continuation sheets you use. And I will mention that sometimes people have trouble with the formatting of this. So if you're having issues with that, you can just use a blank sheet. It doesn't have to necessarily be the one that says continuation sheet at the top. As long as it's included with the HPI. And again, like I mentioned on the couple of slides ago, the statement of significance, he had a brief paragraph on the first page, but you can see there's a lot more information here. So he was able to find a lot more when he did his research phase. And I think that is the end of my presentation. So here's a live look at me at my desk processing all these HPIs that you guys are going to send me. So what questions do you have for me?
Jess, my question is, why should properties that have been surveyed be resurveyed?
That's a great question.
And why should landmarks commissions help us resurvey? Thank you.
Well, as we saw in one of the examples I showed, the residents had a window change. So things change over time as people are, different people are buying the property, making changes. So we want to know the status of the area, the historic district. Does it still have integrity? Do the properties there still speak to the character of the district? In some cases, like we had here recently in Charleston, they did a resurvey of the district and were able to add a few new properties because they are now old enough to be considered eligible. So they were able to be added to the district after some research. So it's important and we love to see them. Also, some of the earlier ones are not as detailed as we would like, and maybe the photos are in black and white and very small. So obviously the technology advances that we've had can give us a much better literal picture of the property. So we love to get new forms in. Yeah, thanks, Meredith.
Question. I'm on the Elkins Historic Landmarks Commission. I think there's a few other people here from my CLG, and we're about to resurvey some of our historic districts in Elkins to include newly eligible properties. In that case, would we still do individual HPI forms for properties we identify, or would we just jump into a district update, I guess would be my question.
We would probably prefer the HPIs just as like a first step because this is something that you all will probably want to talk to our office about as you're moving forward, just so we can kind of get a picture for what you're looking at adding and what the integrity is of the area.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.
James, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, and then we'll go to Amanda.
I think they may have had their hands up from that earlier question.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If they knew about the HPI forms. Yep. I will say though that our Landmarks Commission members are uniquely positioned to help us update these HPI forms, because you guys are in these communities every day and you know what resources are there and you know maybe potentially how things have been changed. So it's really helpful to hear from you all. And you don't have to, it can be kind of overwhelming if you look at your GIS map and see like 200 surveyed resources, but maybe you start with a street and kind of work on that or what have you. It's not required, but it's very helpful for future researchers.
Yeah, it's definitely something Mr. Hilton and I have talked about, because we have quite a few homes in our downtown area and South Charlestown Historic District that actually have some very interesting historical connections to, the nation's history in general. So it's definitely something we are trying to promote and convince the city to get on board with too. So, but yeah, this is super useful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I will say that I'm sure any of us in the office would be happy to chat with anyone if they're looking at possibly doing an expansion or documenting a specific portion of town. We're happy to chat, give you pointers. And our office does also have our survey and planning grant. You can apply for that and use that funding to do a survey. We have a couple communities now that are working on doing. One is doing an initial survey and a National Register nomination, and another one is doing a survey to then update an existing nomination. So that's a project that we commonly have in the office.
Yeah, fortunately, we do have a National Historic Register survey for the South Charlestown Historic Neighborhood, but I think what we're interested in is garnering a lot more of the actual history of each of the residences, because as we have families leave the area that have been here for a long time and new owners come in, we find they're very hungry for the history of their homes, and I think we're starting to lose some of that as people leave us, but yeah. This is also helpful for that too. So it's wonderful.
Yeah, while the National Register District is a great resource for community, they don't often go in depth into any specific property. It's more the general character. So yeah, going back and kind of putting together those histories is a great idea. I would have loved if someone had done that work for me on my house that I bought here in Charleston. I mean, I love doing the research, so I did it myself, but that's a great thing to offer people in the community.
Oh yeah, trust me, I understand. My house is one of the, we'll call it black holes of history in Charlestown. No one can remember who built it. My deed can't be found anywhere, the original deed. So yeah, I would have loved that too for my old house. But
putting over here like, ooh, a challenge.
Exactly. When I have the free time, right? Yes.
Any other questions?